Good afternoon, everybody. When I think of irrigation efficiencies, one quote comes to mind from Peter Cullen from about a decade ago. He made this great prediction. We could double our production on half the water. Well, we've had a good 10-year drought to test whether that's actually true. I'll leave that for all of us to think about just for now. But today's presenter, I take great pleasure in introducing Andrew for many years, 35 years experience. I won't read all that text, just to say that he has been involved in policy and funding and irrigation for 35 years. Andrew, it's completely over to you. We look forward to this time together.
Good afternoon, everyone, and certainly I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this afternoon to really talk about the opportunities that have come from irrigation development associated with the South Australian River Murray Sustainability Program. I have a presentation which I'll go through. What I really wanted to talk about and start today's conversation by suggesting that water is now just another financial element in any irrigation enterprise. And when you consider it from that perspective, it changes the conceptual framework by which water is managed, and it allows new management options to be considered. So if we go back and have a look, what was the catalyst for change? Obviously, it was the Millennium Drought, creating extreme ecological, social, and economic stress. But more importantly, I think it was water trading. And what water trading identified was that water was a valuable commodity. It actually has a fiscal value, although that is seasonally variable. It does depend on the market and the season demand. But when you consider the amount of water, normally the volume of water is limited. Water can have both a capital and operating value. And from a business perspective, that is particularly important. I suppose it was, in terms of trying to focus on the sorts of strategies we would adopt, it was the Basin Plan and its SDLs and water recovery targets that was really the catalyst for that sort of change. In South Australia, however, landholders, irrigators were very insistent that recognition of prior effort that had been adopted in terms of efficient distribution on farm water use was critical to their involvement in the program. That led to a very complex business case which was required to justify the adjustment support, but also to meet the water recovery targets. So in terms of a new business model, what we ended up finding was, say, an industry-government collaboration. The keys to the development of the SARMS program required courage by both the Water Industry Alliance and PIRSA. The sort of functionality that's there, clearly in terms of community and industry prioritisation, it was industry that led the charge with the government providing support. An interesting perspective in terms of SARMS was that it was actually industry that led the business case development with support from government agencies in terms of how would you do that and what was the implications of it. But when it came to project negotiation and delivery of the final agreement with the Commonwealth Government, it was actually the state government stepped forward, undertook those negotiations and I suppose signed the deal with the Commonwealth Government. But ultimately it is about industry and enterprises implementing those projects with some level of oversight by government in the background. So what we're talking about, pre-farm engineering obviously happened in South Australia in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That enabled on-farm engineering to take place, particularly undivine drippers, but also sensors, and really starting to think about water use efficiency in terms of productivity on farm. In terms of the business case development, what we saw was, if you like, the network infrastructure, the open channels pipelines, there was about a 30% saving. If you then looked at the on-farm technology practice, flood irrigation, the micro sprays, drippers, sensors, etc. Again, about a 30% saving on-farm, not globally, but on-farm about a 30%. But what we were then looking at in terms of meeting the requirements of water savings was how do you free that locked up water that farmers are holding really in terms of their business security. Growers really didn't feel that they had the security in their allocation, and hence they adopted a defensive approach to water management. Some of that is intentional. Some people actually recognise that they had water and that they believed that there was a risk there. Others, however, it was just an implied element of their management approach. The SARMS program, what we had was $240 million for 40 gigalitres return for primarily class 3. In terms of the program itself, 3 major components: an irrigation efficiencies element, a water return element, but then an industry adjustment component. Associated with that, because it was related to the broader implications at a regional scale, there was some additional funding, another $25 million in terms of regional economic development. What were the sorts of activities that are undertaken as part of the SARMS program? Won't go into a great deal, but you had obviously irrigation upgrades, you had land purchases. A small one, but interesting, becoming really quite important, was shade netting on crops. Some of it was about water purchase, etc. So a wide variety of activities that came as a consequence of the call for submissions for SARMS. In the first 2 rounds, we're currently in the 3rd round, we're looking at 170 million for about 150 projects scattered right across the River Murray, or those areas that actually receive water from the River Murray. Hence some of the projects up in here and around here. So what are we really talking about in terms of that business reengineering component? As I said earlier, some of it was about how do I restructure my property, how do I change variety. Some of it is about how do I change my marketing approach, shade cloth development, pump efficiency, etc. So how did that work? What we were seeing was that associated with redevelopment of new irrigation technology, it moved to preferred variety selection, alternative crop selection, storage, packing, and cool room to maintain market access and improve timing of product sales, rather than just taking when your fruit is ripe, you then sell it all. It's about how do you market that over time. Some of it was about moving to annual and perennial crop mix designed to manage your risk associated with water availability. Others were about market-orientated operations. So what were the selection of a particular fruit type or viticulture so that you actually had preferred wine or easy peeling mandarins. Interestingly, in the covered crop production type activities, what we saw was people went into it thinking, yes, we would have water savings from reduced evaporation. But what we actually found at the same time is that saving quality of the fruit that came out of it was improved, and the production levels also increased as a consequence, with very significant market outcomes. So what we're seeing at the higher end was really that regional perspective. And what you can see here is that you had 4% of people saying prior to SARMS, their business is thriving. 32% of those that had finished their projects were saying their business was now thriving. You had 26% of people saying things are going well, up to 45%. So a very significant implication at the regional level. And so finally, I suppose what the desired outcome was improved enterprise business viability. Water had become and is increasingly becoming recognised as just another financial input into the enterprise. And some people will say that requires a whole range of different management practices, and I'll agree with that. But what we're really talking about is the potential to improve business efficiency by moving the focus from kilograms per litre to dollars per drop. At the same time, it is also about management focus to remain financially viable. How do you respond and make sure that your enterprise will continue when you're facing a 56% allocation? Or do you need to adopt new management practices and capacity to cope financially when one of your biggest input costs potentially increases from $30 per meg to $340 per meg in 1 year? How do you use new water trading products? How do you use those financial activities as part of that process? So thank you. Happy to try and go into some of those aspects in more detail.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That's absolutely brilliant, and that really painted the picture really well for us in a short space of time. Look, I think we'll go straight to the first question of Peter. Peter Hayes had a question, so if you'd like to come on, Peter, and let's have that question, that'll be really good.
Thanks very much. I had 2 or 3, but I'll start with the one that I think maybe is most important to me. I just wonder, Andrew, what gaps have appeared in human capacity, training and professional development in the region that have been brought up out of the SARMS program? And I guess I'm meaning at both the regional level and at individual business levels.
Thanks, Peter, and good afternoon. Actually, a very important question. I suppose as part of the SARMS program, initially we enabled service providers to support the development of applications, provided some support. What we've found is that there is a real need for people to understand project planning, project delivery, but also their business planning. So if you adopt that new concept that I'm talking about of water as just being another financial element, it really is all about your business planning and your risk management if you're going to survive into the future. It's not, as we've seen previously with the Onfarm irrigation efficiency, there was a whole lot of training and development that was necessary at that time. We're seeing similar sorts of things, but in business planning, business management, and financial accountability.
Thank you.
Tim, I think Tim Waterhouse might have had a question. Is that still the case, Tim?
I guess my question really for Andrew is that one thing I noticed travelling the world with Centec and obviously in irrigation crops is that most commonly the really high profit crops are those where they're entirely market driven. So, you know, where the grower chooses something based on a market opportunity rather than perhaps the more historical farming processes of growing the crop that, you know, you've always grown or that perhaps is grown commonly in the region. I noticed that there's references to that in Andrew's presentation, but I'd be interested to hear more about the extent to which Andrew thinks it's possible to have crop choice driven more by sort of real-time or market prediction activities, if you like.
Again, thanks, Tim. Yes, in some cases, what we've seen when people were looking at their business operations and thinking seriously about their financial outcomes, what they did was actually move from having 100% of their enterprise in one crop into actually thinking about having a mixture. So what we have seen in terms of risk management from a water perspective, water availability perspective, we've seen some people move out of 100% permanent planting to 50-60% permanent planting with 30 to 40% annual. What that meant was that at that particular year, if they were short on water, they just turned off their production of that annual crop. Conversely, what we've also seen is quite a number of people really look at what they thought were the market opportunities, a la easy pill mandarin, etc., and have moved completely to those sorts of crops. So yes, we have seen some capacity to do that, and we've seen that ability to move and really understand their risk profile and think accordingly.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. Thanks very much, Tim. And look, can we move straight to Susan Cuddy, researcher in CSIRO? I think we have sound but not vision. Is that right, Susan? But
No,
there we go. both. That's great. No worries at all. That'd be really good. We look forward to hearing your question, Susan. You're welcome. Yeah.
You're not supposed to be able to see me, Trevor.
You mentioned that earlier. I heard that mentioned. Oh, good.
Sorry, everybody.
No, I fully understand.
Yes, turn that off because I'm doing this.
All right.
I'm doing the sun damage thing. Look, I've actually put up a few questions. Thank you. I put up a few questions, but I guess the one that interests me from a research perspective, Andrew, is what would you see as now key priority research areas? So obviously social research, I think that's would be quite interesting. But I'm thinking more around climate, rainfall, or do you think that? I guess I'd like your ideas on what you see as priority research areas.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I suppose what we have seen is as people move to thinking about water as a financial commodity, yes, there is a whole range of social issues, but clearly that risk management perspective of when does rainfall come, what are the implications, the mix between rainfall and water that's brought in through pumping or etc. for irrigation purposes. What are some of the mixes there? Into the future, will some of the climate change predictions actually start to mean that people will really need to think more seriously about their risk profile in relation to that climate change? So there are a whole range of different areas. Similarly, in the business management, I don't think we have necessarily seen a lot of the research into that nexus of business management. And if you go to third world countries, that could be a sustainable life situation. But in the bigger business stuff, it is also how does that relate to water availability, water planning into the future? So there's a whole spectrum of potential research areas that could be evaluated as part of the program, and where we're seeing irrigators head to into the future.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Susan. Appreciate that hugely. And look, we'll move straight on now to Willem from MDBA.
I think most of my question was answered. I was really curious about what were the actual business improvements that were part of the third tier program. And I think they have been answered mostly. So if you have another question, Trevor, from somebody else.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, you guys hearing me there?
Yeah, we are now.
Just your forehead, though.
The question is the one that I just typed in the box, is what's the level of adoption of people changing technologies from, surface irrigation and furrow irrigation into drip irrigation or the other deemed to be more efficient irrigation systems in that area of the project?
And just because in South Australia we've moved from, if you like, open channels to pipe on demand. What that enabled back in the 80s, 90s was irrigators to actually adopt more efficient irrigation practices, drip irrigation, sensors, and a whole range of that sort of technology. What you would see if you were travelling through perhaps Renmark Irrigation Trust area is probably a 95 to 99% adoption of those sorts of technologies, which was why when we were looking at the SARMS program, people were saying prior effort was particularly important if you were comparing yourself with irrigation districts in Victoria and New South Wales, where they were still at the situation of having open channels, and there were how would you put it, relatively easy efficiency gains to be gained from moving to more advanced technology in terms of the channel system and on-farm irrigation. What we identified was that having moved to the new irrigation technologies, drip, etc., what people were still doing was holding on to 5-10% of their water for a security purposes. And the trick was, how did you encourage them to really think about giving up the water for the environment and taking the cash and redeveloping their business? And hence what we've been talking about is the third generation of irrigation efficiency. Isn't about the adoption of more efficient irrigation practices. It's about how do you use your water globally more efficient in your business enterprise, and hence you will give up that 5-10% of water that you're holding for security purposes, because you understand that in a drought situation, it's actually the dollars that are coming through the door, not necessarily the water. So if you can manage that risk profile, as I said to Tim earlier, some people have moved from 100% permanent crops to 60% permanent crops and 40% annual cropping, which in terms of the annual cropping, from a risk management perspective, if you're at as we are at the moment, 56% allocation, then you just don't plant that component. Or from a market perspective, you can move from garlic to tulips or something else as part of that program, and gives you some flexibility in market opportunities.
We're probably going to have to keep moving. Sorry to interrupt, but we're about 2 or 3 minutes to the 30-minute mark. We've got about three or four questions left. Thank you, Andrew. So I appreciate the effort in that question, the time in that question. Look, there's Tony Messner, Bob Newman, and Rob Welke with these three last questions, which will take us through to the 30-minute mark. So can I just ask Tony Messner's question for him, Andrew, because he can't get hold of the mic. But this is the question. Andrew, given that the environmental water holder will get the additional water and farm businesses will be able to restructure and become more profitable, right? Are you confident that on-farm water use efficiency will improve?
So will on-farm water use efficiency improve? In some cases, what we're seeing is obviously as people have restructured, gone to new pumping systems with improved efficiency of their pump systems, etc. In terms of the SARMS program, it hasn't necessarily been about that water use efficiency. It's been about the business efficiency of water use in an irrigation situation. So what we're really seeing is water's being held for business security. When you can convert that to dollars, then the enterprise has a capital injection which will allow its restructuring and become a more efficient business. And as we're saying to Sue, there is still a whole lot of work that's really necessary to understand what does that really mean and what are the implications.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Look, two questions, Bob Newman and Rob Welke. I see, Rob, you're on board there. Thank you, in your office, travelling in your mobile office. That's great news.
Well, to a fair extent, the question that Tony asked is similar to mine, but I'm actually interested in the overall take-up of best practices and the extent to which we can actually report that at a district and regional scale.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah. Look, that is certainly been one of the big questions that the SARMS program has tried to look at in the background as part of its evaluation process. We have had a number of activities there trying to look at what has been the transition that's been undertaken at a district level, at a regional level. Some of the finding and stuff still need to come together, but certainly it is an issue that we have been aware of as part of that overarching evaluation process.
Thanks.
The last question now from Rob Welke. Thanks so much for taking the time with us, Rob, and you're looking ready to go there. All yours.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Andrew. I noticed that you did mention in passing pump efficiency, and it's part of the financial viability, especially in South Australia with imminent significant price rises in our electricity. I've been in the industry 48 years, and one of the things that in recent times has has really come to my attention is the huge amount of hydraulic inefficiencies in systems, and my work has been trying to get across the message that hydraulic efficiency is actually more important than pump efficiency. But the classic reference is all energy efficiency is due to the pump, and it's not. I'm just wondering whether there's any recognition in the industry other than myself to incorporate hydraulic efficiencies in energy efficiency and therefore financial viability.
Thanks, Robert. Is there a specific element to the program in that regard? The answer is no. But I have seen a number of people, when they are looking at the redesign of their enterprise and their irrigation activities, certainly hydraulic efficiency and the implications of the pipe size and a whole range of other things have been considered as part of that redevelopment. But I think from a broader perspective, it really is about people like yourself and others that are advising landholders. You guys need to be promoting and identifying that as an issue for them to consider as they go through that redevelopment sort of process.
Yeah, Andrew, that's something that I'm doing very proactively. I'm talking with local land services in New South Wales, Department of Environment and Heritage, and also the Victoria Sustainability Victoria. They're all very interested in the work that I'm promoting, and I really hope it does get a Guernsey, and I really do hope that Peter Hayes might take this on board with his role in the IAL professional development.
And certainly from a South Australian perspective, I suppose if we're looking to the future, what we would be hoping is that the upstream states really will start to look at that move from phase one, the off-farm irrigation efficiency, and obviously the piping systems, etc., through to the on-farm efficiency, where certainly your hydraulic efficiency is going to become absolutely critical in terms of the operations of it, and it is that nexus with energy and how you adopt that. But we're also expecting that the upstream states will really start to think about this business efficiency, where water is really another commodity. So you think about how you're managing your enterprise, and where irrigation redevelopment fits, where crop selection fits, where your marketing fits in terms of that activity. So it is just part of a program, and it will be up to the industry to ensure that irrigators themselves understand the implications of a whole range of factors, not just hydraulic efficiency, but financial management, etc. So we're looking at, I think at any rate, the next big evolution in management that's happened in Australia's irrigation industry, particularly over the last 40 years. And if you look globally, as we have here at IceForm and elsewhere, all manner of countries are looking at where are we heading, so that they can start to think about and plan for the future globally. And certainly the lessons that we have here in a whole range of areas are going to be really important as water scarcity globally becomes a significant issue.
I think we've got to wrap it up there. Those questions were insightful and unrivaled experience in Andrew's work. Thanks so much, Andrew. I really appreciate it. IceForm appreciates it, and so does, on behalf of 30 people who couldn't ask the questions which they would have loved to do. In 30 minutes you can't get everything, but we can do this again. It's not hard to do. Thank you everyone for participating. We really appreciate you being on board. A reminder, when you do close down, there'll be a 1-minute feedback. Give us the good, bad and ugly, so we can make these webinars really sing. When we've finished the recording, we'll email a link out. So I think that's all there is. Anything else, Andrew? Everybody happy?
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks everybody. Bye for now.
Good afternoon.